Welcome to my show. I am with a guest here. Her name is Zara Starchild. Zara Starchild, how are you, ma?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right. There was a question that first popped in my mind. I would love to ask, is Starchild your name or is it your nickname? Because that name does not look like a name that is, that is, you understand what I'm saying, ma?
Yeah. It is not my birth name for sure. Um, so I was actually one of those people that was really kind of judgmental about people that changed their names when they became spiritual or whatever. And at some point along my spiritual journey, one of my teachers gave me a spiritual name. And it wasn't Zara Starchild, but it was close. It was Elzara. Elzara Manuela Gabriel was the name that she gave me. And it was difficult for me to resonate with that name, but that's coming in more and more. And then when I started to expand my reach and my business and the people that I was working with and who I wanted to work with, it was kind of like thinking into who I wanted to work with. Um, I shortened, I'm a pretty casual person. I shortened the name from Elzara just to Zara. And then I threw Starchild on the end just as a means to kind of let people know, vibrationally let people know where I was at. So it was kind of like this place of like not hiding anymore, right? So I'm not going to hide anymore that I'm really, really weird and that I like really, really weird spiritual avenues, spiritual paths. And so I'm calling to like, so just with the name presenting as my business, I feel like it's more of my galactic self, more of my starseed self is Zara. Um, my birth name is Jennifer. And now, after holding this name, Zara Starchild, for several years, that when people call me Jen or Jennifer, it's almost there's like a little bit of discord in my energy field that I can really feel like, oh, that's not even me anymore. So it's very interesting that the whole consciousness transcendence in regards to being really judgmental about this particular thing that people do, and then moving through it myself and coming out the other side. And like I'm almost at the feeling point now where I almost want to change it legally because it feels so much more who I am. Yeah.
All right. Thank you
But
very
thanks
much
for
for that.
asking. That's actually the first time I've had that conversation.
Thank you, ma. We know you are an international energy healer. Can you tell us
Mm.
what firstly inspired you, and can you tell us more about that aspect, ma?
Um, So I have been on the spiritual journey and the spiritual path for a very long time. I would say, well, I mean, I would say since childhood, I was going to school as a, in Catholicism, and so that was sort of the foundation of my spiritual journey was Catholicism, and then that evolved, and I broke away from Catholicism. And for a really long time, in my late teens and early 20s, I went through that dark night of the soul where I had that like, is there a God? Right. So at late teens, early 20s, it was like my parents lied to me about Santa Claus. They lied to me about the Easter Bunny. They lied to me about um, the tooth fairy, right? All of the silly things of childhood. So it was like, well, is there a Jesus? Is there a God? Right. So it like came through that. And that was, and even so I'm speaking about it now, I like really feel that in my heart that like um God was so important to me as a child. And like to not have that connection, to not have that knowingness that there's something divine and sacred holding this whole universe together, like the glue of humanity, is really heartbreaking to me. I'm still feeling it. But the question is the energy healer. How did I become the energy healer? So I'm on the spiritual path, and I continued the journeys, and I continued following my heart and following my interest and devoting myself more and more from the physical experiences and normal things that 20-year-old somethings do. And I was moving more into ceremonies and rituals and connecting to God in that way. And that feeling of questioning whether God existed or not, like fully moving through that and fully trusting in that, probably took a good 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years to come to a place of absolute certainty within my own being that there is a God, that there is a universal force behind the physical plane that is moving things, directing things, changing things. And I went through a process of, through one of the spiritual courses that I devoted myself to. The intention was to fully trust in God, that God exists. And through the course of tuning in and devoting and doing the practices and opening and expanding, I met the initiations along the way, which it sounds like, I met the initiations. It sounds really innocent and innocuous, right? So I met the initiations, but the initiations of learning to trust that God existed for me was a complete, utter breakdown and destruction of the marriage, the sacred marriage that I was in at the time, the person that I was devoted to. And then later, a year, maybe 2 years later, it was coming, it was finding my beloved in the new relationship. My beloved had committed suicide, and I found his body several days after. And so those were the initiations that I learned to trust in God from. Like, they were very, very traumatic. But on the other side of each one of those was the safety net and the saving grace and the support from everywhere that came through to lift me up and support me during my devastation and heartbreak. And so my devotion to energy healing and supporting others in connecting with God is sourced really from this quest of finding God myself, for myself, in a real way. And I wouldn't
I'm so sorry.
there's a blessing in every hardship, right? There's a blessing in every challenge. And the blessing is usually about this connection to the divine, or the connection to our inner strength, or the connection to our perseverance. And so when we're working with others to move through their challenges or their obstacles or their experiences, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, it's really about assisting them to connect to this divinity that exists within themselves and within all. And that's always supporting us to find our highest place, our highest good, our highest expression of ourselves. So that's kind of the foundation. I don't know if that answered your question or if that was just a big
All right,
rant.
sir. All right, sir. Thank you, ma. May his soul rest in peace, ma. Um, I want to ask, how can you define spirituality in your own way? What can you say about spirituality? How can you see it? How can you define it, ma?
And right, so continuing that conversation,
Yes, ma.
I think my personal belief is that everyone is on a spiritual journey. And I also personally believe that everyone is an expression of God or God's source, with the life force that animates through us. And so it's my personal belief that God's source energy is expressing as us, right? And having its own experience within its own beingness. And so even those souls that are taking these deep dives into experiences of separation and hardship and struggle, that it's merely God going into the polarity of feeling as though it's not God, and then learning or growing in the experience, or just having the experience of coming back to itself in its wholeness and its oneness. There's this great book that I read when I was going through that dark night of the soul, as I shared with you about when I was a teenager. It began when I was reaching the initiation ceremony of confirmation for Catholicism. And by that time, I had learned a lot about the other religions of the world. And in my learning about the other religions of the world, I couldn't make sense of how the teachings of Catholicism and many of the teachings of the spiritual texts and the spiritual religious spiritual dogma, the teaching is that if you do not believe our way, if you do not believe our way is the one way, our way is the right way, then you will go to hell, right? And so Catholicism held that. And after understanding and learning about Hinduism and Native American spirituality and Buddhism and Islam and all of the Judaism, all of these major religions, and that hundreds of thousands of people are participating in, right? How could it be? How could it be that all of these people would be going to hell? It didn't register, it didn't make sense. And so I couldn't take my vows as a Catholic. And that plunged me into a really intense despair about it, really intense questioning. And I asked God for a sign, whether or not I should become Catholic, what was right. And the sign didn't come until I chose not to. When I chose not to, I was presented with this book at 17 years old called Illusions by Richard Bach. And it is a fantastic book. It's very, very simply written. It's great for teenagers, but it really opened up the possibility of this entire world being like a dream, and how to wake up inside of the dream. And I began to practice it. I began to practice waking up inside of the dream and begin to see things as illusion and begin to direct my thoughts in accordance to my desires. And I began to manifest results through my intentions. And I began to get feedback from the outside world that what I was doing internally, when I was shifting internally, was creating a response. And so it just kept building and building and building from there. And so that is, so that I would have to say that Illusions by Richard Bach is one of the very foundations of my belief that we're all part of God. We're all expressions of God, even the villains out there, and that's hard. I'm not even going to say that I'm a master at, loving and being non-judgmental and non, and accepting of the bad behaviors that are going on. I'm not going to say that, but deep down, I do consciously believe that even the villains are aspects of God's source energy. And they're having the experience of being the villain. which is completely the opposite of what we would imagine God's source energy being, right? Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Ma. Um, I would love to ask, is there any book you're writing? You understand? Is there any book you're writing, or is there any book you are planning to write, or you don't have any of that in mind currently, Ma?
Um, I have been writing some articles for a magazine here in Canada. I'm in New York, but the magazine in Canada is called The Beautiful Life. So I've been doing some writing in that. There is a book up in my consciousness and in my field, but I haven't downloaded it yet or begun working on it yet. There's actually a couple. But currently what I'm working on is, oh, I can show you. Currently what I'm working on is I'm creating a course that blends sacred geometry, art, and the seven sacred flames, and awakening your light body. So awakening your light body with the sacred geometry of the flower of life through art. And so, oh, is it gonna do it? It's not gonna do it. So sacred geometry through art, right? So we build these beautiful mandalas. And the action of creating these mandalas and putting your attention into this sacred geometry begins to open and activate the sacred geometry in your consciousness and through your field. And then each one is infused with the seven sacred flames or one of the seven sacred flames. And so it's taking people through the experience of creating the code and then embodying the flame, the qualities of the flame through their light body to infuse their light body with these qualities and align themselves to this one is the flame of divine will. So divine will and the divine plan for our life. And that's the one that we're starting with. Are you familiar with sacred geometry? Are you familiar with the flower of life?
I'm not familiar with things like that, Ma. I'm sorry.
So this is a two-dimensional, if you look at it, it's a two-dimensional expression of something that's actually multi-dimensional, but even three-dimensional is okay. So if you look at it, if you start in the middle here, this one of the middle ones, and instead of looking at it like a circle, you can make your eyes see it as though it were a sphere, like they were all bubbles, right? All bubbles interconnected together. And so this sacred geometry, the flower of life, is all over the ancient temples and ancient cathedrals from Egypt all the way to now. But what this represents essentially is cell division, right? So when the egg and the sperm come together, any cell division really, when the egg and the sperm come together and they create one cell, and that cell splits into two, and that two splits into four, right? That's what this sacred geometry represents. So it's the power, it's like it's an activation of the power of creation within your own being. And as you focus your attention on it when you're drawing it, because you're drawing it for a long time, we use a stencil and then we do colored pencils or watercolor pencils, and then we do the water paint over the top, and then we do a marker. So you're in this pattern for a long time, and it just starts to open up inside of your consciousness, and you can begin to start seeing these spheres. You're inside of a sphere, and then all of these spheres in your field. And all of these spheres could contain different energies or different ideas or different perspectives or different personalities or different people that we're in our community with together. and the blending of the spheres, when the petals of the flowers are merely the spheres that are overlapping, right? And so it's this interconnectedness of all of our energy with the energy around us. And then through the activation of the violet, or not the violet flame, but this would be the flame of divine will, the flame of the divine plan, we're activating that consciously through our central pillar, through our unique and individualized presence, and then out through our field through all of our creations. So it's like when you intend to create something like your podcast, right? So you pretend you intend to create your podcast to meet and reach millions of people and impact millions of people all around the world. You can see yourself in this sphere in the center, and you see all of the millions of people that you will be touching and reaching with your podcast or whatever creation that you're creating. And you just transmit love. You just love them from the center of your sphere, and that love broadcasts out and attracts and magnetizes them back to you, the center sphere, right? And so the power of life doesn't end with the circle. It's infinite. It's the great field, or in Star Wars, it's the force that holds it all together. Yeah.
All
So that's
right.
what I'm doing right now.
All right. Thank
Playing
you
with
very
this.
much. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, man. Thank you very much, man. Um, Firstly, I want to say after the conversation I've heard, I haven't heard you say the religion you are currently, and I want to also ask, in the religion you are currently, what is the most challenging part you've had in your spiritual journey there currently now?
What was the most
Challenging
challenging
yes, in your
aspect
spiritual journey.
along the
Yes,
spiritual journey?
yes, ma'am.
That's a really good question. The most challenging aspect I find on the spiritual journey is holding my and my consciousness my knowingness that it's all a divine play. So when I hold that frequency within myself that I'm a child of God, I'm an expression of God, and everyone else is also, I have this incredible deep inner peace, security, well-being, strength, power. I've got everything when I'm in that space of knowing that I'm connected to all that is. And so the most challenging aspect is to not get distracted by what is presenting in reality, such as bills, struggles, other people's dramas, right? And sucked into people's dramas is a really big one. Like what other people are experiencing is a big one. And it sucks the consciousness out of I'm in alignment with divine will and all is well and all is in divine order into like, oh my gosh, something's wrong. How can I fix it? How do I fix it? How do I help? Right. Or even any of the problems of the world, even, right? So like the plastic in the ocean and children starving of hunger and pipelines, oil pipelines going across sacred lands and polluting and like everything. When I get sucked into the problems of it, then I am outside of, or my consciousness is outside of the realm of possibility and solution. So I would say that would be the most challenging.
Thank you very much, man. I really
That was a
appreciate it
great
for that.
question. That really made me think, that one.
All right. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Ma. So, lastly, just to conclude, if there is anything you wish, you will have bring back from the ancestors, from the forefathers, what do you think that thing will be?
If there was anything
You would love to
to bring back
inherit, yes, yes, from the ancestors.
from my ancestors,
Yes.
like a message,
I would say maybe it
you
might
mean? Like a
be the
mess?
way the life, the way the life back then, something that is missing in our world today that you wish it would have been in our own time, that is really in their own time then. What do you think that thing will be like? What do you think that thing is?
Huh. You know, what's for me, and I kind of feel it emotionally a little bit, is um in the 1980s, which is where I grew up as a kid, um, people were friendly. They were neighbors were friendly with each other. Neighbors helped each other out. Neighbors on the street knew each other. And when I watch old movies like from the 80s, like the
Hmm.
Gremlins, I think I watched the Gremlins again. uh, they have this, they have that quality to them where people are friendly to each other, they're helping each other out. And um it just feels over the last decade or so with social media and the pandemic did a big number on everybody. There's this guardedness with people, and it seems to be a sense of selfishness, um,
Okay.
all about me kind of feeling. And this is not for everybody. I'm just saying, like, as a kind of blanket that I see. Um, and maybe I'm just naive. Maybe it wasn't like that in the 80s, but I
Okay.
remember it to be like that. And that's what I would that's what I would bring back. And I try to maintain that also in my own relationships with people,
All right.
even casual.
All right. As you said, Star Child. Thank you so much for being on this show. I really appreciate you, man. I really appreciate you for your little time and little effort you put to make this show a successful one. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation and for your beautiful
Bye.
hosting.
Bye bye.
Bye.